Coming to you from an undisclosed location deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, A Marzulli, and this is Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural Report. Hey folks, thanks for watching Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural. I've been a student of A Shroud of Turin ever since I first heard about it almost 36 years ago. With our celebration of Resurrection Sunday coming soon, I thought it'd be appropriate to air these two fascinating interviews on PPS Report. The first is with Barry Schwartz, who was a member of the 1978 Shroud of Turin Research Project, or STURP, and who took hundreds of photographs of the Shroud of Turin while it was being examined over the course of non-stop hours of work. We interviewed Barry for our award-winning Watchers series, and he informed us that he was awake, it's unbelievable, 110 out of the 120 hours. That's dedication. We traveled to Colorado to interview him, and we were blown away by his candidness and knowledge of the Shroud. He keeps a blown-up headshot of the man on the Shroud in his bedroom. Before we show you the interview with Barry, here are some Shroud essentials that should pique your interest. The Shroud of Turin is a long linen cloth made out of flax and measures 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide. It bears the very faint image of a bearded, crucified man with blood stains that match the wounds of crucifixion suffered by Jesus of Nazareth, as recorded in all four gospel narratives. We see blood on the arms. We see nail wounds in the wrist. A lot of artwork shows that the palm of the hand is where a nail went through. That's not according to the Shroud. What's really interesting, forensic experts have looked at this and stated that if you were to hang a man, and let's say by a nail through the palm here, and crucify him that way, it would just tear out. So the Romans knew this, and they would take a nail, let me try this hand, they would take a nail like this and angle it. And so it would come in from the base of the palm and then come out right around in here. Again, no bones were broken, but that pins to the bones of the wrist. That would also sever the nerve, which, you know when you hit your funny bone, how it really hurts? That's what happens here. So he's hanging there, and it's absolutely excruciating. We also know that the man on the Shroud, the legs were not broken. There's a post-mortem blood flow from the wound on the side. It is, again, the idea of blood being mixed with water, corresponding to the biblical accounts. The legs are not broken. And we also know from that there's a blood flow that happened after his death. And it's on the side, just like the biblical narrative tells us. From that wound from the spear, there's an issue of blood and water. The legs are pulled up due to rigor mortis. Blood from the actual wounds also shows evidence of gravity. So it shows a man is being crucified like this and blood is flowing. Remember, he's sinking down in the cross like this, and he has to lift himself up to breathe. And when he does that, we see the flow of blood. There are no stains of body decomposition on the Shroud. For me, what is perhaps the most startling fact about the Shroud of Turin is that it is actually a photographic negative. In other words, when Secunda Pia was hired to photograph the Shroud in 1898, his pictures led to the discovery that the image on the cloth is actually a negative image. The image becomes positive and a photographic negative. This discovery startled the scientific community and stimulated worldwide interest in the Shroud. 1931, Giuseppe Enri photographed the Shroud again with more advanced film technology, confirming that the Shroud is indeed a negative image. Copies of Enri's photos were circulated throughout the world, prompting more scientific inquiry and interest. Dame Isabel Pixick is an artist, but she is also a particle physicist, and thus brings a unique perspective to the study of the Shroud of Turin. She believed there was an event horizon in the tomb where the body of Jesus lay in rigor mortis. Time and space came to a standstill, as well as the laws of gravity. Here's what she has to say about it. The entire resurrection process is akin to the Big Bang creation of the universe, when something was created ex nihilo, from nothing, explains Dame Isabel Pixick. You can read the science of the shroud, such as a total lack of gravity, lack of entropy without gravitational collapse, no time, no space. It confirms to no known law of physics. Let's examine these two experts, the Right Honorable Barry Schwartz, who, by the way, was knighted by the Portuguese government for his work on the Shroud of Turin, and Dame Isabel Pixick, two of the world's foremost experts on the Shroud. Let's examine what they have to say. You can decide for yourself what the Shroud may or may not be. A painting, or perhaps God's calling card.
The Oxford Lab received a £1 million anonymous contribution. Did I mention that?
That's one of the questions right there.
Yeah, and that's a matter of public record.
Hear that?
Mm-hmm. And so what's amazing to me about that is that the real question becomes, when did they know that was coming?
Bingo. Wow.
When did they know that was coming?
Yeah.
Did they not know about it in advance?
Right.
That's possible. But if they knew about it in advance, how much influence might that have had? Because they got it for debunking the Shroud. That's what it was for.
That's what it was for. Sure.
So if they knew in advance, then that's a huge piece of evidence that shows that there was...
Do you feel comfortable, camera?
Yes.
What does the Shroud of Turin, what does the cloth look like up close?
You know, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, well, what does it look like when you're up there and close to it? And I'll tell you something. You know, my first impressions was, this is in way too good a condition to be this old. That was my first impression. And people, skeptics particularly, have said, well, there you go. There's proof that it's not that old. And then I thought about it and I realized, why don't we have this mentioned in the Gospels, except maybe in one or two places, but not with an image on it or anything else? Well, you've got to remember, first of all, this had blood on it. Jewish law forbids that, leaving the grave or even touching it, okay? Now, imagine now if it's not only got blood, but an image as well. You couldn't say that. You couldn't step out and say, look, because there were iconoclasts that would want to destroy it. Not only that, you'd be punished for taking this cloth that's supposed to be in a grave and handling it and taking it out of the tomb and with an image on it. So they had to keep it a secret. I mean, they might have been the next one on the cross if they came running out of the tomb going, look what we found. I don't think that was going to happen. And one man said to me, Mr. Schwartz, does this image violate the second commandment? So now I'm standing there, and I went, second commandment. So I thought about it for a moment, and I said, well, sir, I said, our team did the most in-depth scientific study, and we were able to determine that it's neither a painting, nor a photograph, nor applied by the hand of a man. So, to answer your question, if it's none of those things, okay, and it wasn't applied by the hand of a man, then it was a naturally occurring or supernaturally occurring image. Perhaps God did it. I said, so in that case, since it wasn't done by the hand of a man, then God did the image, and it consequently could not violate any of his commandments. And he looked at me and he said, oh, well, that's a brilliant answer. And then his friend speaks up and says, do you know who this man is? And I said, have no idea. This is the Anglican Archbishop of Wellington, New Zealand. So now I'm embarrassed. Here I am, a Jew, lecturing an archbishop on theology, and I start to apologize. He goes, no, I'm writing it down. He says, that's a brilliant answer.
We'd been talking about where the wound in the hands is, and unlike all the art that has been done, you can see here that the exit wound is actually here at the back of the wrist. The Romans would start by driving the nail here in the thinner furrow between these two kind of fleshy parts of your palm. So it's still in the palm, but it's further up in the palm, and they usually came in at an angle, making it harder to tear it out. And the exit wound would be about right here, and if you look right here, that's where we have the exit wound on the shroud. So, and of course you can see these are the original patches, very distinctly noticeable as patches, and not as, sewn in to be invisible, but to be very visible.
And where are the L-shaped?
The L-shaped burn holes, let's see if we can find, on this half of the shroud are the smaller ones, and there's one and there's the other. This is the fourth level and this is the third level. If you were to look at the dorsal view, you would see them more distinctly, and I can show that to you on that replica over there. You can see
scourging marks are just
and you'll notice scourge marks on his chest, on his arms, on his legs, not just the back, but if you're whipping somebody and they come around, they come around and hit you in the front too. So you have all these things that, there's no way some medieval artist could have even thought of these things, let alone create an image without paint or photographic emulsion.
We're here with Dame Isabel Pixak in her amazing studio, which is, it has a sense of reverence to it that is overwhelming when both Richard and I walk in. It's a pleasure to be here, an honor to be here. Why do you think the Shroud of Turin is not a painting?
It cannot even be denied. The shroud cannot be a painting because it breaks almost every rule of nature. And when natural law is broken, that's it. And let me tell you why. Everybody, every layman thinks that a painting is paint particles on some surface. No. It is paint particles tied together by some kind of liquid, and that goes on the surface, and as long as that liquid is completely continuous, you see a continuous image, and that is a painting. The minute the liquid is hurt, missing, parts of it missing, or entirely missing, it cannot be a painting because it is against natural law. So as long as you see a continuous image, you have to have an absolutely intact, continuous paint film. And that's the very important thing, the liquids which carry a painting. The shroud has an absolutely continuous image. There is no interruption, and there is not one bit of liquid tying material on it. This is a nonsense. Nobody can paint like that. Such a painting does not exist. It cannot exist.
What got you interested in the shroud? How did you, I'm looking around the studio, and I would call this sacred art, for lack of a better.
Sacred art.
It's sacred art. And it's, like I said earlier, when you walk in the door, you just feel I don't know where they use the word supernatural peace, but you feel a supernatural peace when you walk into what I would call a modern day sanctuary. It is in essence, a church, a place of assembly. There is a sacredness here. What got you involved in the shroud? When did you first view it, and what piqued your interest?
Well, believe it or not, at the age of 2, I already was doing drawings. At the age of 11, I won national first prize with my painting. At the age of 14, I painted in the Vatican. So my career came so early, and I would say that from the age of 6 or so, I really almost was drawn to this shroud. I really felt that this is extremely important, not only from the religious point of view, but from the scientific point of view, because some new kind of science opens through this shroud.
One of the most noted skeptics, I won't mention his name, but people will know who I'm talking about, once told me that, all that work of the stirrup team is the rantings of believers. It's very simple if you don't understand the science, that past a certain point, somebody throwing the science at you, you stop and you're not qualified to challenge the science, so you attack the scientist. And that's this particular skeptic's normal technique. And he always then throws the religious card out. But he can't do that with me because I'm Jewish. Okay, if I have an instrument say, a spectrophotometer. I'm taking a reading off of a piece of cloth. When I push the button to take that reading on the instrument, do you think that instrument cares whether I'm a Christian, a Jew, or a Muslim, or a heathen? It doesn't care. The data is the data. So if you don't like what Stirp's conclusions were, go to the peer-reviewed science, study the data, come up with your own conclusions, but it's there. And nobody else has done that but us.
The Sudarium of Oviedo was a cloth that has blood on it that is preserved in Oviedo, Spain from the 7th century. When overlaid with the shroud, apparently we see that there are points of congruency.
Well, the Sudarium is, it not only has blood, but has other fluid stains, probably from the nose and mouth of the victim that the cloth wrapped. There's little doubt that it was a face cloth, the kind of cloth that would have been wrapped around the face of the man of the shroud, assuming that it was him. And to this day, our custom is pretty much everywhere in the world, if somebody dies, say an accident victim, the first thing you do is cover the face. So the same thing would have been true even in the 1st century, that out of respect for the dead, you cover the face. The interesting thing about the Sudarium is it does have provenance back to about 7th century. It also has these blood and fluid stains that, when compared to some of the blood stains, particularly those of the back of the head on the shroud, there does seem to be a very kind of congruency that does exist. I don't know about the number of points, and I don't know that using a technique usually applied to fingerprints is appropriate for image analysis.
You mentioned on my radio show that a £1 million donation was given. Tell us about that.
I guess the real irony of the whole carbon dating business, since we're talking about it, is the fact that after the 3 laboratories ultimately did their testing, published their results in Nature, a radiocarbon article, Oxford Laboratory received a £1 million, British pound sterling, anonymous contribution for debunking the shroud. Interestingly enough, Dr. Tite, who was from the British Museum, left the British Museum, came to Oxford, and some of that money built him a nice lab at Oxford. And look, you know, if the order of events is as I've stated them, and that happened after the fact, then okay, well, so be it. But when did these 3 labs find out that this contribution was coming? Did they have any foreknowledge or forewarning that this was the case, or was it a big surprise to them that came 2 months after the dating was released? Now, of course, if they didn't know about it, no harm, no foul. But if they knew about it, if they knew this contribution was going to come, depending on what they found about the shroud, had to be for debunking the shroud, then I question the entire process.
Everybody looks at the 2 images like this, for instance. 2 separate images which have nothing to do with each other, it seems like. And nobody thinks of it that they were on both sides of the shroud and they were wrapped around a figure. So they were not flat, they were wrapped around. So what does that mean? You look at it, why is it so separate? Why one would not influence the other?
The other, right.
And then you realize suddenly, heaven's sakes, we never noticed it, that there is a horizontal object which we never noticed before, going through, which slices the shroud body into 2 halves. One has nothing to do with the other. What is the single phenomenon which can cause that? We are dealing with 2 event horizons. And we are already a little bit familiar with event horizons, only they are a little bit different than the shroud's event horizon. The event horizon is an object which, when you approach, it cuts space-time into 2 halves. One you can know up to a point which you are approaching from your side. But there will be a point when you cannot know anything anymore what is behind it. The last photon would hit it, the last time quanta will hit it. and after that, nothing.
For all practical purposes, time and space have stopped. Is that correct?
We are very close to it, and I will explain that.
Okay.
This too is.
So the body laid like this in the tomb,
Yes.
just like we see it on the shroud.
Yes, yes.
But suddenly, at the event, it began to levitate.
Yes, the gravity was defeated, the second law. Then time and space stops. And there is a total, for the first time in the history of the universe, there is a total time collapse. And even nature, the scriptures kind of hint at it, that strange things were happening. That was the moment when time stopped. When time stops, the very last information it had, it would project on the event horizon on both sides. And when finally we have no event horizon, it releases its secret, that there was a Big Bang type singularity. There is an explosion which cannot be described. The universe would have stopped existing if somehow it would not have been cut to a very, very minimum of time. And that's why we see on the shroud an unknown thing which looks like burn, but it's not.
In 2002, a clandestine, is the only word I can use, restoration was done without consulting any scientists. Just a small group in Turin took it upon themselves, although I must admit they got Pope John Paul II's permission. But I'm not too sure that by then John Paul knew what he was signing, or even if he signed it, or perhaps the Secretary of State might have signed it. So it was done ostensibly with his permission. And they removed all the patches, and they removed the backing cloth, and they scraped all the burned stuff away, and they vacuumed it, and they used steam in areas to get some of the creases out. And it's now 7 centimeters longer. And they virtually eliminated the possibility for a lot of science.
I believe the event known as the resurrection left the image we see on the Shroud of Turin. The skeptics comes up with new ways of creating an image on a piece of linen cloth, but they look nothing like the detailed image that we see on the Shroud of Turin. What astounds me is the fact that the world did not even see the face on the shroud until the invention of photography. To think that a forger would have known about the photographic process hundreds of years before it was invented is ludicrous. Then we have a deliberate skewed carbon-14 data, which, by the way, has since been proven that the piece of cloth that was taken from the shroud was a place where the poor sisters of Clare repaired the cloth by using a technique called invisible weaving. What this was they would take the cotton fibers and they would do end-to-end splices with the damaged cloth, and this was called invisible weaving. Perhaps the most troubling and disturbing event was the cleanup of any and all forensic evidence by a so-called textile expert. What she did by cleaning and vacuuming the shroud was to remove any and all forensic evidence that future generations might have had access to. It is my unwavering position that this cloth is evidence of the greatest event in all of history, the resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. Hey folks, thanks for watching Politics, Prophecy, and My Supernatural Report. We'll see you back next week right here, same time, same station, for another show.